Well, hey, good morning, everybody. How's everybody doing today? Hope you're having a good start to your Saturday and your weekend. And yeah, things are going and cruising and moving right along for you. It's Saturday. I don't know. I'm tired this morning, and I'm not even exactly completely sure why, but hey, it is what it is. Go ahead and hit that like and subscribe button. Drop a comment if you're on Facebook. Drop a comment if you're on YouTube. Same thing. Twitch, same thing. I'm trying to keep them nice and polite, but hey, you'd be amazed what these comments actually do. And likes help, but comments really go a long way. And that's algorithms take comments a whole lot more into consideration than they do the likes. But like, share, comment. I don't know, leave your favorite recipe. That's weird. I have no idea. I told you I'm tired. I need coffee. Anyway, good thing we do this with coffee or tea or, your morning beverage of choice. So here we go. Salud. All right, so we are in the 16th lesson here into Genesis. So we're continuing the study of Genesis. The beginning, right? In the beginning. This is the start. This is the foundation of the faith. And it's one of those things to where I think it's a whole lot. The Jewish faith holds it a whole lot tighter and a whole lot closer as the fundamentals and the foundations of their faith. I think a lot of Christians and a lot of people inside of Christianity don't necessarily. We look at it and we say, hey, we have the Bible. It's the whole Bible. We take the Old Testament as meaning less than or being less relevant than the New Testament. Granted, we read the Old Testament through the lens of the New Testament, right? We're in the period of grace. We're in the period of life after Jesus, right? The Son came, propitiation has been given for our sins. We have restored relationship with God, right? God restored the relationship, but we are living in restored relationship with God. And so we're in a good age, in a good time, and so this is a great thing. And so when we read sometimes the Old Testament, it can feel off to us. But it's an important thing that we understand, that we read and we grasp, because why did it need to be restored, right? What did people go through? How can we be sure that Jesus is who he said he was? How can we be sure of all these things and have faith and trust inside of this? And so these things are great, and we should dig through them and understand them because they are the pillars of the faith. This is things that we really need to know, have a decent understanding of, and go through it. History matters, and the history of the faith matters. And so Genesis is the starting foundations for that and moving forward. And now we're into lesson 16. This is chapter 13. Genesis is so broad and so wide, and so much time frame is covered inside of Genesis, and most of it's covered very slimly. Right? There's not a lot of information because there's so much time inside of Genesis. And so we're finally getting in. We've been looking at Abram finally getting called. So we started things off, we had the creation narrative and the creation story, letting us understand that, hey, God's the one who put things in order. God did the creation. We went through things. I don't kind of care what kind of situation or path that you believe in as far as how everything or the timelines, whatever. At the end of the day, God's the one who put it together. And then we had that really weird Genesis 6 account where the angels, the sons of God, lusted after the women of men. And we had this account, and then the flood, and then the Tower of Babel. And then after the Tower of Babel, we got into the information about Abram. And God's now setting things up and bringing humanity back together. And he's launching this plan to bring things back into order, bring humanity back into relationship with himself. And he does it with a very peculiar man and a very peculiar couple. They're pagans. And he calls them out. And they're moving. And so we started that, and then we instantly saw last time, it wasn't last week because I was traveling, but still last time we saw that they went into Egypt. and they lied about Sarai. We think Abraham and Sarah. They were originally Abram and Sarai, okay? But lying that she was his brother. No, or she was, wow. He was her brother, right? She was his sister, not husband and wife. We'll find out later, which we did kind of go through, that's, it's a half-truth, but still a half-truth is still a full lie. So now Pharaoh told them to leave, and now we're here into chapter 13. 13 chapters into the first book of the Bible covers all the way from creation through the calling out of the start of God's people, right? Creation, fall, the flood reset, people continuing to go against God, Tower of Babel, scattering, and then getting into this call. So we're getting into this. It's chapter 13. We just did a recap, right? We just recapped. We got caught back up again because it's been a little bit, and 13 weeks. I mean, some studies of the Bible don't even, of certain books don't even last 13 weeks. And we're at 16 weeks in here, and it's 13 chapters so far out of more. So let's just dig into this. Let's do this. It's all of chapter 13 today. Chapter 13, verses 1 to 18. It's a short chapter, but we're doing the whole thing. So let's just dig into it. So Abram went up from Egypt, he and his wife, and all that he had, and Lot went with him into the Negev. Now Abram was very rich in livestock, in silver, and in gold, and he journeyed on from the Negev as far as Bethel, to the place where his tent had been at the beginning, between Bethel and Ai, to the place where he had made an altar at the first. And there Abram called upon the name of the Lord. And Lot, who went with Abram, also had flocks and herds and tents, so that the land could not support both of them dwelling together. For the possessions were so great that they could not dwell together. And there was strife between the herdsmen of Abram's livestock and the herdsmen of Lot's livestock. At that time, the Canaanites and the Perizzites were dwelling in the land. Then Abram said to Lot, "Let there be no strife between you and me, and between your herdsmen and my herdsmen, for we are kinsmen. Is it not the whole land before you? Separate yourself from me. If you take the left hand, I will go to the right. Or if you take the right hand, then I will go to the left." And Lot lifted his eyes and saw that the Jordan Valley was well watered everywhere, like the garden of the Lord, like the land of Egypt, in the direction of Zoar. This was before the Lord destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah. So Lot chose for himself all of the Jordan Valley, and Lot journeyed east. Thus they separated from each other. Abram settled in the land of Canaan, while Lot settled among the cities of the valley, and moved his tent as far as Sodom. And the men of Sodom were wicked, great sinners against the Lord. The Lord said to Abram, after Lot had separated from him, "Lift your eyes and look from the place where you are, northward and southward, and eastward and westward. For all the land that you see, I will give to you and to your offspring forever. I will make your offspring as the dust of the earth, so that if one can count the dust of the earth, your offspring also can be counted. Arise, walk through the length and the breadth of the land, for I will give it to you." So Abram moved his tent and came and settled by the oaks of Mamre, which are at Hebron, and there he built an altar to the Lord. All right, so we're breaking this up into 3 sections. First, we see the first 7 verses, the struggle. Verses 8 to 13, we get into the solution, or Abram's solution at least. And then 14 to 18, the Lord speaks. Let's dig into it. Verses 1 and 2. So Abram went up from Egypt, he and his wife and all that he had, and Lot with him into the Negev. Now Abram was very rich in livestock, in silver, and in gold. So basically the first two verses essentially wrap up the last chapter, chapter 12. A lot of commentaries hold these two verses as being a part of chapter 12 when the Pharaoh said, "Now leave," and they left. So here you go. So Abram went up and they left. They left out of Egypt. Okay, so this is basically just wrapping up that section. Okay, so it's done. So he left. Pharaoh sends he and Sarai and everyone away after that tribulation, right? That they were getting plagues and all sorts of things. There's a lot of foreshadowing to what's going to happen inside of Egypt during the time when the Israelites are stuck in Egypt. And remember, this is Moses speaking here. He's telling the narrative to the Israelites who are at this point wandering the desert. And so he's foreshadowing a bit and letting them know, here's what's going on. God was showing the same stuff all the time. And so we get into that. Now, Pharaoh did not take back, because if you notice, when we look at this, Abram was very rich in livestock. Okay. Well, Pharaoh gave them tons of stuff. And he didn't, he gave them tons of stuff for Sarai, right? Oh, yeah, I'm going to take your sister. Thank you. Here's some thank you gifts, right? It was a custom thing. And Pharaoh was very rich. And so he blessed accordingly. Well, Pharaoh didn't take that stuff back, right? So Abram got a lot of stuff from being in Egypt and then just left and was able to take everything that he had given or had received and just went. But notice there's an extra piece in here. Really two, but it's one. It's monetary, right? There's an extra monetary piece in here. He was rich in silver and gold. Now, this is the first that we've seen of this. If you remember, when they left after his father died, he left with their livestock. They left with people, all their servants and all these things. He left with people, and he left with his tents, and they left with their stuff. Right? But nothing ever mentioned money. There wasn't any mention of money. I mean, we know from you get up here that, they were very, very well off. But there hasn't been mention of it. So this is giving us an indication that he did some business while he was in Egypt, which, I mean, if you were given so much livestock and so much other stuff, you become a fairly wealthy person. And if you're decent in business at all. And again, with the types of lying, and again, it's one of those, it's a half-truth. And to me, I'm a high honor kind of guy. And so that straight up is a lie. As far as I'm concerned, that is a lie. And if you're willing to go that route, chances are you're a fairly shrewd businessman. And so it makes sense that he's got a lot of silver and gold and dealt well inside of there. And came out a whole lot better than they went into the situation. Okay. Now, we're not told about Pharaoh, again, giving Abram silver or gold. So this is presumably either things that he came with already. When his father passed, he just took all that stuff and he had a bunch of silver and gold. And I think more than but still, what he got acquired through trading in his travels, primarily in Egypt. Okay. Now, just a reminder, the Negev, I know it has a B on it. It's pronounced like a V, and so sometimes it's written with a V. It's just, it is what it is. Negev is that dry desert region it's in the southern portion of Israel. So when you think like Jesus went into the wilderness and was tempted, and he could turn, Satan was trying to tempt him to turn stones into bread so that he could eat, when he was out there for 40 days. I think this is like the Negev, right? It's just barren land. Things don't grow. It's just miserable. And so that's where he went. He was going through the Negev, this barren land, to go back to where he had been. 3 and 4. And he journeyed on from the Negev as far as Bethel, to the place where his tent had been at the beginning. Now, this is kind of confusing. If you remember 2 weeks ago, if you remember the last lesson, it's kind of confusing, but we'll get into it, okay? But just be aware. He journeyed on from the Negev as far as Bethel, to the place where his tent had been at the beginning, between Bethel and Ai, to the place where he had made an altar at the first, and there Abram called upon the name of the Lord. Now, why is this confusing? Well, if you remember the last lesson, if you remember chapter 12, or if you look back to chapter 12, Abram built 2 altars. And this place where we're being described right now, between Bethel and Ai, that's actually the second place that he built an altar. The first place where he built an altar, God appeared to him, right? That was that time where we're saying, is this, was this Jesus showing up pre being in the flesh, and yet still showing up in the form of a man and talking to him and appearing to him and doing that? Or, what was it? But he was at an oak or a terebinth, and so he built an altar there. Well, what's being described here is the first place where he got into the land after that, and he settled and he built an altar and he started to call upon the Lord. It is that first place. That first altar that he built built the altar because God appeared to him. Okay, built an altar. Now we're getting to the spot where, okay, now I'm just building an altar in trust and in faith, and I'm calling upon the Lord at this place between Bethel and Ai. Okay, that's the section where he's talking about. So Abram goes back to where this pilgrimage inside of the land had started, right? He shows up. God shows up and says, this is it. He goes home into this one section. This is where that pilgrimage starts, as far as pilgrimage of faith and trusting God inside of the land. Now, the journey from the way this is written inside of the Hebrew, it's really hard to see it inside of the English, but just be aware, because again, we read this and we think, it's kind of hard for us to imagine some of this. We live in a time of cars and airplanes, and 120, 130 years ago, people were traveling by train, and that was an amazingly fast invention. And the thought that you could get across North America in a few days was astonishing. Absolutely astonishing. Even if it took you 2 weeks, it was absolutely astonishingly fast. Now we get frustrated when we can't get across America in 5 or 6 hours because of airplanes. Unless we're driving, in which case still it's going to take a few days. But it's one of those things, we look at these things and it's really difficult for us to put ourselves into their shoes. They didn't have bicycles. They didn't have motorcycles. They didn't have trains. They didn't have planes. They didn't have automobiles, right? They didn't have any of that. And so this journey was a little different. And he's journeying with servants. He's traveling with slaves. They've got lots of livestock. Well, unless you are around lots of livestock and all you think about is, I travel with my dog or a cat, it's really easy to have a water bottle for your dog or your cat. It's not so easy to have a water bottle for 300 large animals or more. Lots. He was very rich. In fact, this very rich, the way that in verse 2, that rich and how that shows, I'm trying to think of how to describe it. The word doesn't necessarily, rich is a fair translation because that's how we would kind of associate that, because that was a monetary thing. Having livestock like that was seen as a monetary, that was a trading source. So it was wealth in that, but it actually translates really more as like heavy. He not burdened, and that's again why this is a great translation as rich. When we think heavy, we think, oh, that's a burden. No. It's not a burden that he was weighted down with all of these livestock. It was a blessing. This man was well off. This was a sign of prosperity. This was a sign of position and power. And so this is a good thing, but he's heavy with it. Lots Lots and lots and lots. And so this journeying is written in a way that it implies and indicates that this is going from watering hole and staying for a day or two to a watering hole and staying for a day or two to a watering hole and staying for a day or two. This is not a straight shot, because we read this and he journeyed on from the Negev as far as Bethel to the place where his tent had been. Okay, and to us that just sounds like, yeah, they just picked up stakes and went and everything was fine and dandy. Hundreds, if not thousands of livestock. You got probably close to 100 servants going with you. All the tents. This is a caravan. Not to mention, this is just Abram at this point. We're not even talking about Lot. And we're told here in a minute, Lot was very rich in all of this as well as with tents, plural. Tents, plural. These tents are big. This isn't REI tents or something you can go pick up at the sporting goods store, at Sportsman's or whatever, right? These aren't little tiny tents. This is a lot. One tent would probably take up an entire, a cart. A cart, if an animal, a beast of burden was pulling a cart, it might carry 2 tents, maybe. And he's got tents plural. So this stuff is a lot going on. So they were stopping from place to place to get where they're going. Okay. So again, this was not describing the first altar that was built here. This is why this is kind of confusing. It's describing the second one. Let's take a look at Genesis chapter 12. Let's just go back one chapter, verses 6 to 8, so we can get a better understanding of what's happening here and why this is maybe seen as the place where this started for him. So 6 to 8, we're going just a little bit broader for context. Abram passed through the land to the place at Shechem, to the oak of Moreh. Now remember, oak or terebinth depends on your translation. How this is written, it just means the tall trees. It was a recognizable tall tree in a place of, at that point, was worship. It was a pagan worship, but it was still a place of worship. People just knew these giant trees were an indication of a place of worship. Okay, to the oak of Moreh. At that time, the Canaanites were in the land. Okay, then the Lord appeared to Abram and said, "To your offspring I will give you this land." So he built an altar there to the Lord. Perfect. Who had appeared to him? He built the altar in a response, as this is a place where God appeared. Building the altar. Fantastic. Verse 8. This is where it really comes into play. From there he moved on to the hill country on the east of Bethel and pitched his tent. Notice, this is where he first pitched his tent. We weren't told that he pitched his tent earlier. Here we see that he pitches his tent. He pitched his tent with Bethel on the west and Ai on the east, and there he built an altar to the Lord and called upon the name of the Lord. So this is what's being described here. This is the place where he first settled in and built an altar to God. The first altar was God showed up here. This is obviously a place where God can be. Again, this goes back to that understanding, pagan understanding and the understanding of the day. Cosmic geography. This stuff plays in big time throughout the Old Testament and even into the New Testament. But cosmic geography plays into this very, very deeply. God showed up. That is a place where God does things and shows up. That is a great idea, to build an altar or a worshiping place where God shows up and shows himself. That makes sense. Now, then he moves on and he finds a place and he settles. So this is really where it begins for him, is where he settles. First altar was a response. Now he's settling, and now he's calling upon the Lord. That is why this is where this begins. 5 and 7. And Lot, who went with Abram, because remember, Lot's been around the whole time. Lot went with Abram, also had flocks and herds. Flocks, plural. And herds, plural. And tents, plural. Lot was really well off as well. Maybe not as well off as Abram, but still very, very well off. 6. So so that the land could not support both of them dwelling together. Now, mind you, they left Egypt, they're going through the Negev, and they're finally getting here. It has been, remember, why'd they leave? They left because of the famine. It was bad. And so they went to Egypt, got richer, had to leave Egypt because they might die if they stayed. Let's be honest. Okay, read between the lines. They might die if they stayed. They start heading back. They're going through the Negev. They're going through this really desolate desert, right? They're going through this hard air land, stopping at every watering hole that they can, and they finally get back. The Canaanites are still there, right? The Perizzites are there. All these people groups are there, living in the land. These guys show up, and they have a lot more stuff than they did when they left, and they couldn't survive because of the famine. Now they're back with even more, and the land cannot support both of them because there's only so much land available, because a lot of it's already taken by the Canaanites and the Perizzites. Okay? So they could not support both of them dwelling together, for their possessions were so great that they could not dwell together. Verse 7. And there was strife between the herdsmen of Abram's livestock and the herdsmen of Lot's livestock. And at that time, the Canaanites and the Perizzites were dwelling in the land. Okay, notice it wasn't necessarily straight up strife between Lot and Abram. They weren't necessarily fighting. They're servants, and they're people who were working the animals and maintaining the flocks and the herds, and were out there feeding them. They had tents out there too. They were trying to survive, and they were trying to live, and they were trying to make sure that each of their flocks or herds got the food, got the water. And so they're intermixing and intermingling, and they're complaining, hey, this is our part of the land. Our animals need this food and water. You guys can't take this. Well, we need it too. There's just not enough for everybody. It can't go around. And so they couldn't handle this because of all this good. Now, I really want to point out here, they're fighting over food and water for the livestock because there just wasn't enough ground. Sometimes really good things cause problems. Okay? Too much of a blessing can cause problems. This is a lot of good. They have both become incredibly wealthy. They have a lot of livestock, and this is now creating a problem. And so this problem needs a solution. Well, Abram comes up with a solution. 8 and 9. And if you're on the video, you're going to see there's an entire page of notes for 2 verses. Because in a Western world and in a post-Jesus world, we do things a little differently. We think of things a little differently. And especially, again, you add that Western mentality into it. We read this with very different eyes than the original intended audience read this. And so we need to shift our mentality. And this is why it's appropriate that when we study God's word, we take it for what it was meant for the original intended recipients, so that we apply the appropriate meaning to our lives today. We don't just read it with how we would take that in our culture, in our society, in our time. We take it how it was intended, so that we can apply the actual meaning rather than what we want it to mean or what we think it means. Okay, so here we go. 8 and 9. Then Abram said to Lot, let there be no strife between you and me, and between your herdsmen and my herdsmen, for we are kinsmen. Is not the whole land before you? Separate yourself from me. If you take the left hand, I will go to the right. Or if you take the right hand, then I will go to the left. Okay. Again, giant famine. Struggle, right? They leave. Most commentators will say that was the first problem. They were pagans, okay? This was a brand new, as far as they were concerned, this was a new God or a different God. They didn't know. And so, it's one of those hindsight 2020. Sure, it's really easy to find fault in this. Okay, God obviously gave them grace and continued on. So I think we can too. Okay, so here we go. So they leave. They go to Egypt. They lie in Egypt, get incredibly wealthy based on and because of the lie. That's not God's blessing them. That was Pharaoh, the earth. That was, right, the world blessing them for the lie. And then God punishing everything around them, saying this isn't right. And comes to find out, oh, you're the cause of the problem. You need to leave. Take your wife and go. Again, read between the lines. Take your wife and go before I kill you, and take your wife or kill you both. So they leave. They travel back through the desert, loaded down, again, heavy with goods. Loaded down, going through the desert. It's a good thing, but still, having to stop at whatever watering hole they can to take care of their animals, to take care of themselves so that they don't lose all of their livestock on the way back home, where they're pilgrims, right? So they're getting to where they're trying to go. And then they finally get there, and there's not enough land because there's too many animals, too much livestock for the land to take care of with what land is available where they're at and settled. They can't do it. So Abram does something. Abram does something that is absolutely unheard of. It doesn't make any sense. Culturally, it makes no sense whatsoever what he does. But let's wait. Let's talk about that in just a second. First of all, it talks about herdsmen, the herdsmen. And this shows how well off, by the way, how well off both Abram and Lot were. They had so much flock, so many herds, that they needed multiple different types of herdsmen going out. And these herdsmen were starting to bicker because of the turf wars, right? This is a problem. It's a good problem, but it's a problem. Now, Abram then turns around and says, we don't need the strife between you and me, between your herdsman and my herdsman, for we are kinsmen. Now, the Hebrew here for kinsmen, because depending on the translation you're reading, it could be brothers, it could be family, it could be kinsmen, it could be men. All right, there's so many different translations on this because the word here in Hebrew is ish. And ish means male. It's not like Adam, where we would just say he's a man, but it's a defining term, and it means male. And it can mean a male cousin. It could actually mean husband, but that doesn't make sense. They're not husbands to each other, right? So, you start going through the context. I really like the ESV's translation here with kinsmen because it gets the point across. We're family. We're the heads of our houses, and we're family. We need to not be causing problems. We're sojourners coming into a foreign land. Okay? If we create too much strife, who's going to stop the Canaanites, the Perizzites, or the Hittites, who weren't too far away, to come in and off with their heads? Right? We can't do this. We need to stand united, and we need to do these things and go from here, right? We can't continue on like this. So, kinsmen, great term. We're family. We're family. Some translations say brothers, but I think that's puts a little bit too much into it because Lot was Abram's nephew. And if you put this as brothers, even though Abram would definitely be older than Lot, it changes the impact of what Abram does here. What Abram does here is so big and so different, and quite frankly, out of cultural norm and outside the culture, that it's quite striking. In fact, this is brought in a way that it's intended to be kind of this shock and awe. Why would he do that? That makes no sense. Why would Abram do this? And that it contrasts, okay, it amplifies and contrasts Lot's decision. Now, mind you, in a Western mentality where we come from, Lot makes a lot of sense. In fact, this whole situation kind of makes a lot of sense because we're in a time frame of grace and forgiveness, and we do things a little bit differently. And the culture that we live in today, we do a little thing that I like to call it, I kind of get it from Sonny, but still, that I like to call child worship. Our lives are surrounded by our children. You look at the United States, everything we do is for our children. Every single thing we do is for and towards our children. I went through this. I don't want my kids to do this. I have to change did you turn out as a decent human being? Are you an active and good participant in society? Yes. Maybe your parents did an okay job. they do it perfect? Probably not. I've never met a parent who has, right? You don't come out with instruction manuals. So, maybe your parents did an okay job. Yeah, but I was expected to be seen and not heard. Well, I met a lot of children, and there are times, my friend, I can tell you what, I wish some kids were seen and not heard sometimes. I wish sometimes my kids were seen and not heard. But, other times I laugh hysterically because their sense of humor are really coming into play, and it's fun and it's funny. But neither here nor there, right? And so we do all of these things. Our lives are surrounded by activities for our children. We work our tails off so that our kids can do 4 different extracurricular activities, get into the schools that we want them to get into, to do all of these things, and then we build up an enormous amount of wealth, or a tiny, minuscule amount of anything, in a hopes that we can leave it for our children. Yeah, it's good to want to better the following generations. But think about what we're doing. This is idolatry. We put our children in the place of God. We worship children in this society. We worship children in this society to the degree that instead of providing counseling, which, by the way, has been the norm throughout all of human existence, if someone says, I feel like I'm not who I am, you provide counseling and you help people come to terms with who they are. Now we say, is that accurate? That's how you feel? 5-year-old, 6-year-old, 7-year-old? Have some drugs and surgery. That's asinine. That is absolutely crazy. But it's what we're doing because we worship children. This is an idolatry. That's what's happening. This is straight up idolatry. And so when we read this, we struggle so greatly with understanding what's actually happening here and what's actually being said here. So let's get back into reality and let's pull back a little bit into the days of old and to the ancient Near East and to this mentality. Men were the head of the households. Okay? I understand we want to say men and women are equal. Awesome. Go into a different culture. You're going to see that it's very different. Anyway, men were the heads of the household. It was a big deal. The man ran things. Then you got up and through the generations, and it was the oldest, and usually of the relatives. And so sometimes a grandfather or even a great-grandfather would actually run the households for generations down until they passed, and then it would pass to one, and or it would start to split. And it would go out until the generational lines went. Okay, welcome to how that goes through. And so we have Abram, the uncle of Lot, basically bowing and telling Lot, you know what? I'm trusting God. It's kind of what's happening here. This is, again, read between the lines. I'm trusting God. God's already promised all of this. So I'm trusting that God's going to fulfill his promise in this. Lot, take your pick. If you want the land over here, take it. I'll go to the other side. You want that side? Because I'm not playing a game here. You can't, this isn't the Princess Bride where you can't outwit an Italian, right? I already, there was poison in both. No, it's take whichever side you want. I'll take the other side. You get first picks, first dibs. Now, in a cultural understanding of this, the proper response to this would be doubling down on that grace and that graciousness. No, uncle. You're the honored one. We're on a pilgrimage. God has called to you. We are on a pilgrimage with you, for you, going towards this God. You take what's best. You're the one who has the honor here. You take what's best. Okay, so Abram does something that is completely unheard of here. Passes that blessing down the line and says, take what you will. Now, again, people who are reading this are going to have in their mind the understanding that Lot's expected response is, no. You take your pick, and I'll take whatever's left. But Lot doesn't do that. Lot doesn't do that. As we're going to see here in a second, Lot does not do that. Now, really quickly, some commentaries, in fact, a lot of commentaries, criticize Abram here for this, saying Abram shouldn't have done this. He should have followed through and trusted God's promise, blah, 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 blah. Lot came up, as far as I'm concerned, Lot came up with a very intelligent and intuitive way to resolve the situation. He shows grace. This is an indication of showing grace and going for it. The Lord does not rebuke Abram for this. Let's bear this in mind. Pay attention to what happens here. The Lord does not rebuke Abram for this. Not at all. I mean, Pharaoh rebuked him, maybe even on behalf of the Lord, per se, inside of Egypt. Why'd you lie? We have all this issue. Just take your wife and leave. Like, I just be gone with you, okay? But here, God does not rebuke Abram for this at all. So maybe we should trust God and trust the narrative of what's going on here and what's being told. That's not the point. The point here isn't necessarily Abram did something bad. No, Abram came up with a clever solution here, and it was very good. The actual thing that we're supposed to be taking away here is this was a problem with Lot. Lot did not follow through with what the social norm is and was and how he should handle himself in this situation. Lot created a problem here. The uncle lowering himself below the nephew to make peace would be huge and crazy in this society, and it speaks volumes about his faith that God would continue to provide, because he's not guaranteed that Lot's going to follow the social norm, and Lot does not. We see in 10 and 11 here. And Lot lifted his eyes. Okay, Abram bows down and says, "You take what you will." Lot responds. Lot lifts up his eyes and saw that the Jordan Valley was well watered everywhere, like the garden of the Lord, like the land of Egypt, in the direction of Zoar. This was before the Lord destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah. So Lot chose for himself all of the Jordan Valley, and Lot journeyed eastward. Thus they separated from each other. Okay. Again, it's very easy to miss what's going on here. This response is a direct and utter slap in the face to Abram. The original hearers and readers of this would grasp that. This is a slap in the face response. It should not have happened. In our society, this is almost expected. That's how far off base we are from a biblical understanding of what's going on. In our society, this is normal. You know what? Hey, Junior, I basically adopted you. You're like my kid. I want what's best for you. You pick. And don't worry about me. I'm getting older. You take what you want because you've got your life ahead of you. Pick what you want. I'll just do it. I'll take whatever's left. Don't worry about it. I'll just take whatever's left. And we expect the children to go and do that. Hence, child worship. Here, in this case, not the situation. The honor and the respect goes uphill in age. Respect your elders. Respect your mother and father. Honor your mother and father. Okay, these things, they're there for a reason, and that was the cultural norm. This was a big no-no, a gigantic cultural faux pas, big time. And this would speak volumes really to anybody in that area today, but definitely to anyone from the area at that time. This was such an inappropriate move by Lot that it would shock and probably infuriate the hearers and the readers of this. People reading this from that culture would be very, very upset at the decision and the way that Lot acted. This is a shock and awe kind of part of the story. They're shocked that Abram would do this, but they understand that, well, okay, if he's going to do that, then you're going to bow back and say, no, Uncle, you take. But he doesn't. He doesn't do that. And so this is a gigantic shock and awe on both sides. It's a giant slap in the face. Abram is willing to bow to solve the conflict and thinking that Lot will most likely give back. Lot does not. And he takes what he wants and he looks out, takes it upon his own accord to look out and see, wow, the Jordan Valley over there is beautiful. It's beautiful. Like, look at it. It's lush. It's green. It's well watered. There's water everywhere. It's like the garden of the Lord. Oh, you got it. That means the Garden of Eden. This is a reference back to the original creation point. It's like the Garden of Eden. It's perfect. It's beautiful. It's gorgeous. It's flowing with milk and honey. It's everything I want. I want that. It was like the Garden of Eden. It's also like the land of Egypt, which was flowing and fertile thanks to the Nile. And that was their place of refuge during the famine. Oh, this is great, and it's in the direction of Zoar. But then he makes a point. Moses points out here to kind of set the stage. This is before Sodom and Gomorrah were destroyed. Remember, this is being written after Sodom and Gomorrah had been destroyed. So he's placing the time frame for the readers, for the hearers. They know. Sodom and Gomorrah, this was in the time and in the land of great evil. So great of evil that account is known today. Still today. Okay, this is a big deal. Okay, and as we pointed out earlier in the Genesis study, some historians and theologians point to an Eastern movement as going away from God and going away from God's good graces. Okay, they moved east out of Eden. They moved eastward. When God scattered the people from the Tower of Babel, they scattered eastward, they were coming from the east, coming towards the Tower of Babel, trying to get back to God. You start seeing some of this eastward movement. And so some are pointing out, hey, he's moving east. It's going away from God's good graces. It's kind of a common theme. 12 and 13. So Abram settled in the land of Canaan, while Lot settled among the cities of the valley and moved his tent as far as Sodom. He'd already pointed out, Sodom and Gomorrah had not been destroyed yet. And now he's moving them as far as Sodom. 13. Now the men of Sodom were wicked, great sinners against the Lord. So Abram stayed west of the Jordan, and Lot moved his tent to the southern part of the Dead Sea. It's kind of the regions where this was happening. Men of Sodom were wicked. Okay, wicked, great. Like what? I mean, we know because we've read the story or you've heard the stories. They get turned into a pillar of salt. Like God destroys it. Like it's big time, right? Bad. How wicked? Like what? Can we get some examples? Like what does this mean? Yeah, okay. It's brought up a little bit in Ezekiel 16:49. Behold, this was the guilt of your sister Sodom. She and her daughters had pride. They had pride. They had excess of food and prosperous ease. They were in the land of plenty, and they used and abused. But they did not aid the poor and the needy. Now, wait a minute. Sodom and Gomorrah. So Sodom, that's where we get the term sodomy. That should give you an idea. But that's not necessarily what God is pointing out through Scripture was the biggest offense. That's not even what God was pointing out here. So we're reading Ezekiel, and Ezekiel's telling us they were well off. They were doing well. I mean, they were unholy people and doing all sorts of ungodly things. But what was the biggest thing that we're told here in Ezekiel 16:49 that was the biggest problem? They didn't aid the poor and the needy. They weren't generous. They didn't take care of those who were in need. I mean, there's a reason why God says, take care of the sojourners. Take care of the widows and the orphans. They can't do things for themselves. You need to take care of them. You need to bless them. So there's a reason why the early church, so many confuse and conflict the ideas of the early church of saying, hey, I'm going to sell my stuff so that no one's in need. With communism and socialism, which by the way it's not the case. That's not what was being said inside of that. at all. In fact, the rebuking that the people got when they sold and they didn't give it back was because they said, everything that I sell, all of it, all the proceeds are going here. Everything, every dime comes from this sale, comes here. They held back. The rebuking was, you said and you didn't do. That's the rebuking. Okay, get out of the way here. It's not communism. It wasn't saying everybody needs to go and sell everything to support everyone else. No. This is, the issue here is greed. You're not taking care of those who need help. You're in a good situation. You're in a good boat. You're doing well. You're well off. And yet you are squandering and in greed. You are holding on and squandering the wealth that is meant to bless those around you, to do good with, and you're holding on to it in greed. That's the problem. You're not helping those around you. Wow. Okay, what about 2 Peter? It's in 2 Peter, New Testament. What's the New Testament talk about this a little bit? 2 Peter chapter 2, verses 6 to 8. So if by turning the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah to ashes, he condemned them to extinction. Whoa, okay, that's bold. Making them an example of what is going to happen to the ungodly. Whew, all right, 7. And if he rescued the righteous Lot, greatly distressed by the sensual conduct of the wicked. All right, sensual conduct of the wicked. Sodom, where we get sodomy. Okay, and we get the idea. The sensual conduct of the wicked. For as that righteous man lived, look at this, Lot, who just slapped his uncle in the face, means there's more to the story, right? It's counted righteous here. As for that righteous man lived among them day after day, he was tormenting his righteous soul over their lawless deeds that he saw and heard. This was a sexually perverse region, horrific in nature. You might call it America today. I don't know. Really bad, really, really bad. But if you go back to Ezekiel, even on top of all of this thing and being surrounded by it and seeing it, it was out all over the streets everywhere you looked. He couldn't get away from it, and it was tormenting his soul, and he was starting to have problems because of this. And yet Ezekiel tells us that wasn't even the worst of it. That wasn't even the worst of it. It's pretty bad. That's pretty bad. Well, let's keep going. Keep going. Let's wrap this up. Lord speaks. This is 14 to 17. We'll finish with 18 here in a second. 14 to 17. The Lord said, and again, all caps Lord, this is Yahweh. The Lord said to Abram after Lot had separated from him. So this is after Lot left. Okay, Lot picked. He went his direction. Abram went his direction. You think all is well. It's a little weird. It's a slap in the face, but it is what it is, right? C'est la vie. The Lord said to Abram after Lot had separated from him, lift up your eyes. Pause. Notice the distinction here. Notice the distinction here. Go back. Go back. Look at this. You get into what Abram did. Talks to Lot and says, hey, you pick. Lot lifted up his eyes and saw. Abram didn't say lift up your eyes. Lot lifted up his eyes because it was a selfish deed. And that was the whole point of this, is to set that contrast. The Lord said to Abram, now you lift up your eyes. Lot picked what he wanted. True paraphrase, right? Lot picked what he wanted. You waited for me. Now lift up your eyes and look from the place where you are, northward and southward and eastward and westward. For all the land that you see, I will give to you and to your offspring forever. I will make your offspring as the dust of the earth, so that if one can count the dust of the earth, your offspring also can be counted. Mind you, Sarai is barren. They have not seen anything of this yet. 17. Arise, walk through the length and the breadth of the land, for I will give it to you. So the Lord, God, Yahweh, confirms that his promise to Abram is still valid and good. Abram is still in God's favor. he directs he directs Abram to lift up his eyes. Lot did it out of selfish desire, but Abram waited and trusted God's promise. This is a sign of his faith and his trust now. He's recognizing, you know what? I didn't do it right in Egypt. Things went poorly. I shouldn't have done this. I'm going to try trusting a little bit more here. Trusted and waited, and God provides and shows him what he has. Now, the land and the offspring, God's reaffirming his promise that we see in 12:7. Says, then the Lord appeared to Abram and said, to your offspring, I will give this land. So he built an altar, right? That's where he built the altar. Okay, I will give this land. He's redoing this, reiterating that promise. This land is still for you and your offspring. Then he says, walk the land. This is kind of a legal thing, right? When he's walk the land, it was an ancient Near East custom for new royalty, including like the pharaoh. When a pharaoh died and a new pharaoh took over, he would walk the perimeter wall and declaring that was his land. Now he was taking care of it. Many of the Near East and ancient Near East people groups, that was normal. When someone would conquer a land and take it over, or it was new reign for them, they would go and they would walk the land. It was a declaration that this is mine. It is a declaration of ownership. I am ruling over this land. And so God commands Abram, go walk it. Take control over it. This is yours now. I am giving it to you. I am giving it to your people. It's yours. Go walk the land. Okay, is a legal statute. 18. So Abram moved his tent and came and settled by the oaks or terebinths. Okay, depending on translation. Again, gigantic trees that were towering over the rest, that was easily recognizable, oaks or terebinths, of Mamre, which are at Hebron. And there he built an altar to the Lord. Now, this is presumably after actually traveling it, right? He most likely already went out and traveled it, did the walking, did his stuff, claimed the land, more or less, right? And he moves his tent and the residents there to the city of Hebron. Hebron was the bigger city, right? It was the bigger, more known area. But by the oaks or the terebinth of Mamre, which was a smaller village or town. So he builds out kind of in the outskirts of town. Abram builds an altar to God at the area of worship, again at the terebinth area, near the major strategic city of Hebron. Now, why am I saying this is a major strategic city? Well, Hebron in Hebrew means the confederacy. It means confederacy. It's a joining of clans coming together. That's pretty much what it means. The people groups of that area were coming together. Now, it was an area primarily settled by the Hittites, but there were different Hittite clans, okay, who were in the area, and it was strategically located on the midway through on the ridge route between Jerusalem and Beersheba. It's the highest town in all of Palestine, at least at the time, right? It was the highest town in all of Palestine. And it's actually where Abraham and Sarah, Isaac and Rebekah, and Jacob and Leah are buried. Here's your fun facts for the day. All right, so what can we take away from this? What can we take away? So after fleeing the land during the famine, getting rich in Egypt, on a lie, right? Not a good thing, but still getting rich in Egypt, then leaving Egypt to come back to the land that the Lord provided, the surplus of blessings ended up causing strife. It ended up being almost a curse, right? It started causing problems between Lot's people and Abraham's people. So Abraham showed humility to restore peace and balance. And that's something that Lot did not return, which, by the way, as we discussed, he should have. He should have. It was handled very poorly on Lot's side. But he didn't return it. Now, God confirmed his favor towards Abraham and reaffirmed his promise to give Abraham children and the land. So Abraham returned to faith and trusting the Lord, prior to God's confirming that, by the way. But he returned to the faith and trusting the Lord. So don't follow a bad step up with another bad step. Instead, recognize when you have done wrong and repent, which means turn back, go the other way, go back towards God, okay? Turn back to the Lord and to his ways, even after you mess up. It's okay. We all mess up. Don't get me wrong. The mess up is not okay, but we all do it. It doesn't give you a license to do it. You're not James Bond. You don't get the license to go and do this. But turn back. Go back towards God. Father God, thank you so much for today. Thank you for your word, for your many blessings. We ask that you bless us through this study and through your word. I ask that you give us the strength and the courage to go out and do what it is that you're calling us as individuals and as people, as an entire people group, to go out and do. That we turn back to you. That we see the wrongdoings that we've done and we turn back to you. That we don't fall into these temptations, into these issues anymore. God, break the chains. Break these strongholds. Give us the strength and the courage. Give us the empowerment of the Holy Spirit, God, to go through this. We thank you so much. In Jesus' name, amen. Thank you, guys. Hope you got something out of it. And hey, we will talk to you next time. Have a great weekend, and God bless.